Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever scrolled through the news and thought, man, how do ancient texts keep becoming the focal point of modern crises? Well, you're definitely in the right place. Today, we're unpacking a seriously fascinating philosophical framework by thinker Ali Mohammed Al-Shurafa Al-Hammadi. We're going to explore a massive paradigm shift in how we view history, text, and faith. Okay, let's jump right into the deep end with the core question Al-Shurafa is trying to answer. Why are societies, particularly Islamic societies, experiencing such intense ideological clashes today? Why is there this huge rise in political and intellectual conflicts that basically use faith as a shield? It's a heavy question for sure, but identifying the true root cause, that's literally step one to finding any kind of lasting cure.
Section 1. The root of the crisis.
So, to find the root of all this chaos, Al-Shurafa argues we have to look back at a really critical centuries-old error. The big takeaway here is that the decline of these societies isn't actually about the original faith itself, not at all. It's about a very dangerous substitution. Basically, over centuries, flawed human history, jurisprudence, and political interpretations got elevated to the level of absolute divine truth. By putting these human narratives on a pedestal above the original text of the Quran, societies kind of lost their way. They traded a universal message for one that was highly politicized.
Section 2. Divine versus Religious Discourse.
Let's break this down by defining two totally different concepts that have been mixed up for way too long. First up is what Al-Shurafa calls the Divine Discourse. This is the absolute eternal revelation, specifically the Quran. And the key here is that it's constant. It's valid for all times and all places, because it speaks to universal human nature. Its entire focus is on uniting humanity under high moral values. We're talking mercy, justice, freedom, peaceful coexistence, and absolutely zero compulsion.
But then, on the flip side, we have the religious discourse. And this right here is where the trouble starts. This discourse is 100% a human product. It's made up of human jurisprudence, historical narratives, interpretations. And because it's human, it's relative. It changes. It's heavily influenced by the specific political vibes of whoever is speaking at the time. Al-Shurafa points out that this discourse became totally packed with weak narratives driven by political Islam, which historically just promoted division to serve those in power.
So the contrast is pretty wild when you think about it. You have this eternal, absolute message meant to lift up human dignity, stacked against a human-made, constantly shifting ideology. It's honestly like mistaking a universal constitution for a politician's campaign speech. And this framework suggests that mixing up these two things is basically the defining tragedy of modern ideological conflict.
Section 3. Rethinking the 5 pillars.
Now, how does this actually play out in the real world? It's super interesting to see how the basic practices of the faith are viewed under these two lenses. That human-created religious discourse turned the foundational pillars of the faith into these strict, final rituals. It kind of reduced the whole religion to just checking a bunch of boxes. But if you look through the lens of the Divine Discourse, Al-Shurafa argues those pillars were never meant to be the final goal. Actually, scratch that. They were meant to be educational tools, daily reminders to build justice and cooperation into our actual everyday lives. A perfect example of this is zakat, or charity. The human religious discourse gets totally bogged down in strict, rigid conditions, almost treating it like calculating your taxes, right? But the Divine Discourse totally flips the script. It transforms charity from this mindless habit into a dynamic tool. The goal isn't just doing the ritual. The goal is literally ending poverty. It's about building genuine social solidarity and closing the wealth gap. It completely shifts the why behind what you're doing.
Section 4. Redefining the other.
This whole paradigm shift also completely changes how people interact with the rest of the world. We can see impartially from the source material how the human-created religious discourse really laid the groundwork for historical hostility. It used human interpretations to justify violence and exclusion. It literally divided the world into two warring camps, the domain of Islam and the domain of war. It built massive walls based on political power, not spiritual truth.
But then, in stark contrast, when you look at the absolute rule from the Divine Discourse, you find this incredibly clear statement: no compulsion in religion. Al-Shurafa emphasizes that this completely forbids forcing beliefs on anybody. So, instead of building walls, the Divine Discourse is all about extending bridges of human brotherhood. It's about protecting the life and dignity of every single person, no matter what they believe.
Section 5. Reforming the educational system.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the root of the conflict. How do we actually fix it? Well, Al-Shurafa gives us a super practical 4-step roadmap to update education. The ultimate goal here is to help children build a sort of self-immunity against extremism right from the classroom. Let's walk through it.
Step 1 is a huge one. Purify the curricula. This means we have to actively go into educational materials and just completely strip out those divisive, human-made historical texts. Any weak narratives or traditions that incite hatred or discriminate against the other absolutely have to be pulled out of school books so they stop fueling this generational hatred.
Once you take out that harmful historical baggage, you have to replace it with actual meaning, which brings us to steps 2 and 3. Instead of just dry memorization of old disputed rules, schools need to teach the moral purpose behind the actions. Teach how fasting actually creates empathy for the hungry. Teach how prayer should naturally stop immorality in your daily life. It's all about integrating shared human ethics, like peace and tolerance, and training teachers to deliver this in a really flexible, open way.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, by clearing out the heavy, honestly pretty toxic political baggage of human history, this paradigm shift aims to totally liberate the mind. It wants to restore the faith back to its original unifying intent. It separates the fallible human stuff from the perfect divine stuff, aiming to reveal a direct, universal message of peace and security for all of humanity.
I want to leave you with a really provocative thought to chew on today. This entire framework is challenging us to look very closely at what we accept as absolute truth versus what is just human history. So how will you separate the baggage of human history from the core of divine intent in your own worldview? Because rethinking how we perceive history versus truth, that might just be the very first step toward lasting peace. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning everything.
مؤسسة رسالة السلام العالمية، رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.